Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and before we can get to work I'm going to have to clear off all this junk here on the bench. I've just been experimenting with some ideas on setting up some sort of a top-down view into a little container where I can keep the whole thing enclosed and feed it with a whole bunch of dampness and moisture. That's an old humidifier. So I'm just kicking some ideas around here. I'm not sure where it's going to lead, but let's get these things out of the way, and then we can tend to the European night crawlers. At least one of them needs to be fed, and the other one we're just going to check in on to see how it's coming along. So the systems that I'm referring to are the one right back there in the VermiBag Mini. That's the one that's 628 days old at this point, 72 days away from reaching its 700th day in service since I've had those European night crawlers, and it'll be the first time I've ever harvested any European night crawler castings before. So I am targeting day 700 of that population. So last time we checked in there was a lot of bedding material, so feeding is definitely on the list for today. After 7 days of no food, I'm assuming they'll need a little bit of food. As for the bedding though, I know there was a lot of bedding in there that we recycled. We didn't add bedding last time, we just recycled bedding. I got a feeling there's probably still going to be a lot left over, so we probably won't have to add any, but I've got some on standby if we need it. The younger bin over there in that white tub is 106 days old at this point. When we last checked in here a week ago, 7 days ago, we did add food, but it did seem like it wasn't even necessary. There was tons of leftover foods in there. There was a lot of leftover bedding and stuff in there. So even though that system's only received 15 feedings, it's already 106 days old at this point. And I'm really contemplating sending that system down the road of possibly setting it up for foraging. So, you know, it is possible that that last feeding it received on its 99th day in service will be its final feeding. Because there was a lot of leftovers in there. I bet you there still are. And there's not a lot of space in there either. So I got no problem with that. If that bin was, you know, in service for 99 days, up until we started withholding feedings, giving them I don't know how much time to forage through it and break down all the leftovers, then so be it. So I'm going to check in there, verify that that's really what I want to do, and then I'll shoot upstairs and grab some food. But chances are we're only going to be feeding the larger system, the VermiBag Mini. So let's get to work. Alright, so now if my memory serves me correctly, the system has plenty of food in it, so we probably won't be feeding today. I just want to confirm that that is the case, because in my tracking system I never really marked off that we're committing to the whole idea of foraging in this container. But if you watched last week's video, and I just ended up reviewing it a short while ago, just to confirm if my gut feeling was right, I do feel like between all the leftovers we located in here last week, in addition to the fresh food we added, chances are we're going to find a good amount of leftovers in here. I just see a cocoon over here on the plastic. I figured I'd drop it down into the container. There's probably others that I'm missing. Shouldn't be a big deal. I think cocoons are fairly tough. Even when the worms, for example, in the winter time are unable to survive the harsh conditions, the cocoons do make it through the winter, surviving, I think, dryness, excess moisture, excess cold, and they always come out on the other end quite fine. And you know, talk about cocoons, crazy. I mean, I know this piece of paper would have been removed last week when we fed, and chances are we scraped a lot of the material off or shook a lot of the material off. But I mean, I see a cocoon here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you know, when you see a couple worms linked together, like you see right there, and I'm not sure if there's other examples of it out here, that's a mating pair. So that right there is another cocoon in the making. So it does seem like this top surface is a hot spot for mating activity. In last week's video, there was nobody out here when I opened up the plastic other than 4 worms. 2 of them linked together over here mating, 2 of them linked together over there mating, and today we've got a little bit more of a mixed bag, sort of a little party going on here. A couple of these worms really got some nice size to them too. Nice color, nice size. It's interesting how some of them have good dark color. Some of them seem really pale, pasty. Alright, so that's kind of an interesting observation there. There's a lot of cocoons getting dropped onto that top surface of paper. And you know what? Did we just knock off the that mating pair, or is that another mating pair? Ooh, this poor piece of paper, it's falling apart. But I'm going to do what I can to keep it intact so we can just lay it right back where it was. This seems to be a fairly popular spot, and I just figured let's give it back to them. It's a nice seasoned piece of material. Here too, I'm seeing, you know, a cocoon right there stuck to the worm. Another cocoon right there, another cocoon right there, another cocoon right there, as well as another one right next to it, another one in here. So this bin looks like it's just teeming with the next generation of babies to be born. It's pretty cool. Pretty soon we're just going to see a whole bunch of little itsy bitsy baby worms zipping around this bin. So this this piece of paper would traditionally be laid down over where I last fed, just to mark where I last fed. Even though we're not feeding today, I guess I'll just return it to where we found it. Because it does seem to be like the second floor of the hangout spot that the worms really seem to be enjoying. This is one of the types of materials in this bin that I'd really like to see start getting worked down, is the little leaf stems. The leaves themselves I don't worry about. I'm sure that if this is a piece of leaf, might be, maybe it's paper, it's hard to tell. I'm sure that the leafy matter will go away quickly if it's not all gone already, but it's their sticks. It's the sticks of all the leaves that take forever. So now, like I said, we're only in here to verify that my gut feeling that foraging in this bin is the next best step. And when we last fed, we found a whole pile of leftovers that we dropped down the middle, and we put the fresh feeding out onto the two edges. Besides the two coffee filters, we use coffee filters like these to place the food into. Two of these were added with the feeding. And we found at least two, maybe even three other old coffee filters while rummaging through the old feedings, taking stock of what we've got. And I do feel like, I think we're going to probably just go ahead and commit to the reclassification of this bin, so that as of day 99 last week, a week ago today, that will have entered its, I guess its foraging stage. I mean, right after giving it a fresh feeding, it's hard to say that it's, you know, really foraging at that point. They're obviously still feeding on the freshly added foods, but with that being the final feeding, it does seem like the appropriate time to start considering it as a, you know, kind of in that next stage of its life cycles. I don't want to disrupt what's in here too much, but if we can, we'll just take a peek at how things are progressing with these previous feedings. It almost seems like the entire contents of this coffee filter have remained almost undisturbed. There's a lot of gooey leafy matter in here, vegetable matter, and what was added in addition to that one last week was out on this edge, over on this corner, over here somewhere. So we'll see if we can locate the other paper bundle in which last week's feeding was applied. And here it feels like it might not be quite as full, but I don't see any worm activity, so my guess is that they're quite content with the older applications of food that were placed right in between these two. We picked around, we found a lot of old leftovers, and when we put it all back together, we just placed the leftover scraps of food that we located at that time down the middle. So that stuff should be all through here, and I wouldn't be surprised if we found a bunch of leftovers of that too. So I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that this bin has got plenty of food in it, and they're not going to starve. Not to mention the fact that there's just stuff all over this bin everywhere for them to feed on. Here too, I believe it's just another little bundle with some food type stuff in it. Something about the night crawlers, they just don't seem to have that kind of behavior like the red wigglers like I'm used to. I'm a little bit new to the, well, I can't really say I'm new to the night crawlers anymore because it has been, you know, 628 days since I started raising night crawlers. But I had red wigglers long before I had night crawlers. This might be some leftovers too. I think I see part of a banana peel. So look at that. That's all leftover food. Definitely makes sense not to add fresh food to this bin. And I'm, you know, at this point, I think it's clear that I am confirming that the feeding it received on its 99th day is going to be its final feeding for a while. But you can also see as I push things up, I'm almost spilling out the side. So a lot of times I also use not only the bin's age as my deciding factor to kind of call it quits with the feedings and move on to the next phase of the bin's life cycle. You know, I also use the limitations of the capacity of the container that the worms are in. So I think this is a great bin to start foraging in. They've had a week now to start breaking all the stuff they've got down, and we'll check in again here and there. But on a foraging bin, I don't even know if it's so important to check in so regularly. So I don't think we'll be popping in here as regularly. If we come back down here to tend to night crawlers, European night crawlers that is, then we'll probably just be checking in on the VermiBag Mini and leaving this one to be. But once in a while we might pop in to see how things are progressing. But this is pretty much what I expected to see. I expected to see some leftovers, not only of last week's feeding, but of the previous feedings as well. I didn't expect to see so much mating activity on the surface, which is a great little surprise. But the one thing I would like to start seeing is less and less leftovers. You know, I'd really like to see the worms break all that stuff down and really start focusing on all these other little scraps throughout the bin. All these little leaf stems, any other scraps of bedding material scattered throughout the bin. This bin is just chock full of stuff that the worms could be working on. So it makes complete sense to begin withholding feedings on these guys and just let them continue on with what they've already got. Let me just do a little bit of aeration out here on the outer edges just to loosen things up a bit. I guess I'll do the same out here on this side as well. Because, you know, if we're going to set this bin off on the side, not feed it for a while, let it forage, then this could be the last time I have a chance to aerate the material for a while. So let's do that really quick just to make it really easy for the worms to pass through it in all different sections of the bin. It'll all settle as the worms continue working it all down. But I think it, you know, benefits the microscopic life forms in the bin to have a good steady air supply. And yeah, I can't wait to start seeing those little cocoons start hatching out. So this was where we last fed. We didn't feed today, but we'll just let them have that piece of paper. And let's see here. Oh, looks like we took a couple worms along for a ride here. We'll try to lay this back out the way we found it without tearing it to shreds, but there's a piece of shred right there. It was unavoidable, it seems. We'll just use it over there. Try to maximize coverage. These were the real hardy worms that managed to survive all that being put to and fro. They managed to survive remaining up on on the top surface there. So they get to continue their party now that the interruption is over. We'll just cover everything up the way we found it. Try to do so nice and thoroughly to keep the moisture that's in there locked in. So I usually try to pin this plastic covering up against all four edges and all the corners to try to really limit the amount of air that escapes the bin by evaporation. But, you know, in a bin like this where there's this much moisture, I'm sure a little evaporation wouldn't hurt either. But for now, we're going to keep things really moist, because I think that promotes the breakdown of the materials within the bin. So I think it'll be a positive thing. All right, let's head on over to the VermiBag Mini. I have my little bag of kitchen scraps, frozen kitchen scraps down here. All different types of chopped up vegetables and fruits and banana peels, you name it. Here is one of these weird things. I did include it in last week's feeding too. It's something that I've in the past always placed into my bins whole. It's an avocado pit, and as you might know, it's a pretty good sized seed. You know, it's almost the size of like a billiard ball. Maybe not that big, but pretty good size. Definitely bigger than the chrome ball that you see in a pinball machine, or maybe about that size. Probably bigger. Depends on the avocado, I suppose. But here you can see an example of one that I've sliced up. If you watched last week's feeding of these bins too, you might have noticed me adding some of this in here. And if we're lucky, we might bump into it again so we could see how it's progressing. But I got a feeling by being, sliced up like this, it's going to give it a good edge to being broken down a lot more quickly than if it was just placed in there as a whole seed. I don't really have any bedding materials that I intend to add in today's feeding. I'm assuming that we're going to find a whole bunch of leftover from last time. And last time we had just placed it in underneath the feeding. So what we could do is we could just pick around a little bit and see if all that leftover paper is still in here. But I got a feeling that this bin's actually doing pretty good with regards to bedding materials. So last time all we did was we just picked a whole bunch of it together and made a stack of it, but we had a really good sized stack of recycled paper materials that we collected and placed under the feeding. So we'll see what we can come up with here today. I like what I'm seeing here. A lot of times I don't see a lot of nightcrawler activity around the feeding area. Somehow they just don't seem to be as much of a, a crowding type worm as I mentioned earlier. But here they seem to oftentimes be located right there above the last feeding. So it's a little bit more interesting to find the worms that are kind of mobbing the food in this European nightcrawler container than in other nightcrawler containers. Last week's feeding, we did not add any fresh bedding. We just piled the food in on top of existing old bedding. And as I make my way down, maybe all those worms are just what remains in the place of what had previously been the food. So I'm already getting down to what seems to be some of the, reclaimed paper that we used last time as the foundation for the feeding. A couple things I'm finding here do seem to be like the stem of a vegetable. I found another one like that earlier. Stacked it up over there. So here's a whole bunch more paper. So chances are they've actually gone ahead and depleted what was given to them last week. I'm just curious about the remnants of the paper. Like how much of it remains, or did it actually get the attention I was hoping that it would get by being placed right under the food? So I'm just going to dig down a little bit deeper. Here again, I think all of this is just paper scraps, all the stuff that we piled in beneath the feeding. Doesn't seem to be quite as much as I thought though, or as much as I remembered. So maybe it's getting broken down. I always had this impression that as much as the worms will, enjoy eating the fresh foods you give them, they'll almost as equally enjoy eating the carbon-rich paper type materials that you give them. So I've got a stack here, we're collecting what we find as we go. But I don't feel like I've really collected quite as much as I found last week. So what I'll do is I'll stick to my portioning method of giving the worms, say, maybe 2 handfuls of food, like I usually do. But what I'll do is I'll consider what's here, this little stack of reclaimed paper, as the equivalent of maybe 1 paper coffee filter. So what I'll do is I'll add in some kitchen scraps into one, and then we'll just put in that second handful of food on top without a coffee filter, and then we'll stack all these remnants on top of that, and then who knows, maybe by next week we'll see very little leftover paper and we can get back to adding bedding a little bit more generously. Okay, so that'll be handful number 1. Maybe before I plop in handful number 2, we can spread these leftovers in between the two. That should make it really popular and increase its chances of getting consumed and done away with. I guess if I see any other little scraps of it, we can get that down in there too. And then in goes handful number 2. And maybe another banana peel has that. Okay. Seems like a pretty good size feeding. I think last time I fed, I probably added grit. In a system this old too, I assume that there's got to be grit everywhere. So I don't add grit every time. I just figured maybe last time maybe I would add some, but this time I guess we'll skip. Because I don't think it's necessary to add it every single time. And we can start backfilling everything here and covering it all up. I think, you know, if you compare the contents of this bin to the one that we just checked on previously, you can clearly tell that this one has a lot less moisture in it. And with those plastic coverings, I am attempting to, you know, lock in whatever moisture is in the bin and not allow it to escape. And I've even got plastic surrounding the container to a certain point to try to help limit the amount of moisture that escapes through the sides of the container through this fabric. But I typically don't like adding water to my bins if I don't have to. I like to assume that the moisture that I'm adding via the food is going to be adequate. So I think I'm going to keep going with this the way it is, even though it seems a little bit dry. I'm going to assume that it's still okay, and I'm not going to worry so much about adding any moisture. Although I do have this sense that at some point in the future I might need to somehow supplement the moisture in this container. But for now I think we're in good shape, so let's just cover up and call it a day. So I'm gonna take care of putting this thing away and cleaning up. Luckily there's not too much cleanup to do. But before I go, let me just really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching my video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please let me know by leaving me a quick thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.